We decided to Photoshop some quote-unquote average-looking celebrities to be more conventionally attractive or more correctly model-esque. And when we say average, we don't really mean unattractive, it's just that they're not typically top models. So in this video, we'll try to explain some of the thought processes behind what facial features are being changed. And in simple terms, what are we changing to make people look more attractive? We'll see that there are general facial characteristics that are more or less universally attractive, which we often refer to as universal beauty standards. Every face is unique, so it will be quite interesting to see that the changes we make are also quite uniquely catered. To get the overarching idea, you'll want to know the four main parts of an attractive face, as defined by Naini et al., which is facial averageness or appearing normal, free of deformities or scars, facial dimorphism, how masculine or feminine you are, symmetry, which we all know, and proportion is also pretty straightforward. We have many videos that go more in depth in each of these, but let's try to keep them in mind throughout the video. So let's go into the Liquify tool and put these concepts to the test. And keep in mind, there is nothing wrong with any of these faces. We're just applying the scientific literature on the topic and trying to show what a cosmetic surgeon might be thinking during the planning stage. Let's see what changes we can make to Constance Wu's face. She already has an attractive baseline to work with, but we can make a few changes. We want to first note that her intercanthal distance, or the distance between her eyes, is actually quite large. This is actually more common among East Asian populations, according to Sana et al., as well as other researchers on the topic, so it isn't really something we want to drastically alter because it is part of her ethnic characteristic. Accordingly, we can make her eyes larger or move her eyes closer together. Let's make her eyes larger as that, and this is also a traditionally feminizing facial feature often emphasized in Eastern beauty culture. So despite being an ethnic characteristic, it is something that a lot of people still do get changed. Constance has some eye asymmetry here, and we can also make one eye slightly less large to enhance the balance and symmetry of both of them. Depending on what kind of beauty standard we are trying to emulate, the East or the West, Constance could have a more angular jaw, and if we're referencing Western standards, that would be more appropriate. Since she is well known for her roles in Western films, we'll give her a more prominent jawline, but not overdoing it. We can also contour her chin to be a bit more angular and yet still feminine and V-shaped. We can also accentuate the protrusion of her cheekbones to be more prominent and high near the eyes, and this is the classic high fashion look that is so sought after through surgery, but often seems to go wrong. This is because we don't want to overemphasize how prominent the cheekbones are forwardly, but rather make them look more defined and high in the lateral direction. High cheekbones are another universal beauty standard, especially for women because they signal high estrogen in development, and also they're a characteristic of strong dentofacial growth, but most importantly, they just add lift and glamour to the face by making the eyes appear more well protected. Constance also seems to have prominent nasolabial folds, so we can eliminate that with the healing brush. We can also slightly reduce the height of her chin to be more feminine, as well as giving her a shorter face shape. Both of these will make the face look more attractive, if not overdone. And one note on wrinkles is that we generally don't want to remove all of the wrinkles of the face. There are some wrinkles that actually add refinement, but there are some others that have negative stereotypes with them. In regards to her hairline, Constance has a great feminine hairline that is also rounded and juvenile in shape, so we're not going to change that either. We can also use the same dodge and burn technique to add more contouring around the cheekbones and jaw, and the end result should be in theory a more attractive version of the same face, but we'll leave that up to you to decide. The idea here is, again, this isn't the theoretically most attractive, because the theoretically most attractive would actually be toning down some of these changes to be closer to her original face. This would be more of the idealized standards that we see in the modeling world, which is not something we actually follow for real people. On that note, if we want to make her look less warm and approachable like you would see with a top model, we can decrease the contrast in her eyes by giving her lighter eyes, but it also doesn't really affect her overall beauty as we've covered in the past. The brown-eyed effect has an improvement in trust, while blue eyes do have a decrease in the trustworthiness of the face. If you want to make her look more alluring or assertive, we can also position her eyebrows lower in Photoshop as well. And her hair is also a strong point, so we can't really improve the styling at all. Let's Photoshop Maya Hawke from Stranger Things. Some things you don't want to change are her incredibly high and defined cheekbones. You can see how they pop just around the eyes. Maya also has a feminine and rounded hairline much like Constance, and she already has high quality health markers in clear skin and healthy hair, so we don't need to change much of that texturing either. Maya's eyes are well proportioned, which falls in line with the concept of averageness, making her eyes look pleasant. Her lips are also quite full and shapely, which is desirable for women, and her nose shouldn't really warrant any changing either. However, the first thing that we can change about the face is Maya's palpable slant, or basically how upturned the eyes are. Her eyes aren't droopy by any means, and her head position can certainly affect how the eyes look, but generally more upturned eyes are considered attractive in women according to Kwon et al. Study. Next, she has a bit of a longer face shape. Maya does a great job of using fuller, wider hairstyles to give the illusion of a more compact face shape. To make her face slightly shorter, we can subtly reduce her chin and forehead height. Maya already has quite balanced facial thirds, but in the after, her thirds are nearly identical, so her forehead is the same length as her lower anterior facial height, and the mid-face, as you can see here. Maya has some quite wide cheekbones, which makes her jaw width look a bit narrow by proportion. The jaw is not extremely narrow, but we can add a subtle amount of width to better harmonize with her face shape. A narrow jaw is actually a feminine facial feature, according to Liverusha et al., so that does help boost her attractiveness, but we can also make the jaw slightly wider so that it doesn't detract from the femininity while also aligning with the concept of averageness, or a normal jaw width that you would expect to see on a woman. We can also change her jawline to be more defined like the previous faces, and again, this is just a universal attractive trait because it's an indication of healthy dentofacial development. After all of these changes, we can make some final tweaks in something like FaceApp, where FaceApp is just going to accentuate some of the feminine features we covered previously, and it will also increase the contrast around her eyes to look more sexy, like we discussed in our video of what makes a face sexy versus beautiful. FaceApp also adds some shadows and contouring like we did for the other faces, but much through Photoshop, mind you, and the specific changes are very subtle, but they collectively add up to make a more attractive face. Maya's original hair color works well for her face, as too dark of a hair color does clash with fairer skin and brows and becomes more of a fashion statement, and so with hair color it's really negligible unless it is deliberately dark for the sake of being contrasting. Let's Photoshop Steve Carell to be more attractive. He doesn't have the most remarkable or striking facial features, and he also has some distinct signs of aging, especially around the eyes. Still, he's been aging well into his 50s and now even the 60s, and he is arguably getting better looking. So first off, we can make his bone structure more robust or prominent by giving him a taller ramus, thereby enhancing his jaw angle and definition. We can also improve the definition around his chin and cheekbones. We can also make his eyebrows more upturned and alert because he looks very kind and friendly without them, and most fashion models have striking and dominant facial features, as you can see here. Steve has some apparent eye asymmetry where one eye is lower than the other, but that won't really be noticeable in Photoshop while retaining the same eye shape. Steve actually has a wide facial structure, which is considered usually attractive for most men and is commonly also seen in the modeling industry. However, his thin lips act to lengthen the mid-face and just distract from how commanding the face appears. This is an example of where thin lips being masculine actually don't make him more attractive. In simple speak, being more masculine or feminine appearing will make you arguably more attractive up to a limit, but there are certain features where it doesn't exactly work. Steve has a great hairline for his age, and even compared to guys 20 years younger, his forehead balances with his other facial thirds, so we don't really need to change much there either. We don't want to remove all of his fine lines and wrinkles, as he is an older gentleman, so it gives him a more refined look. We do, however, want to remove the labiomental creasing around the chin, which is typically not considered attractive. This will make his jawline arguably look a lot better too. Through a technique called dodge and burn in Photoshop, we can add some shadows and definitions around his cheekbones and jawline to really give it that popping FaceApp look. We can also slightly darken his eyebrows, which is a very sexually dimorphic and masculine feature that also looks more youthful and virile. Of course, there are many other things we can change, but hopefully you should begin to see an appreciable difference in the features of an attractive and less attractive face. And Steve's dentofacial growth, or his jaw structure, is a lot more prominent and defined, which is a universal beauty standard because it indicates dentofacial health. Gonka et al. Highlights the importance of your facial structure, your cheekbones, teeth, jawline, for attractiveness and also for making first impressions. And his lips are also quite thin, which goes against the notion of averageness, where drastically changing very thin lips in Photoshop is not really possible if you want it to look natural, but we can add a little bit of lip volume. We can, however, go into FaceApp to make the lips look fuller, but also modify them in Photoshop to look more natural. Lastly, we can make Steve's nose a bit slimmer and less bulbous to add harmony to his face, bringing back the proportion to being within his iris distances. His nose is very characteristic and large, and by no means is it a bad nose, but subtly changing the width and height can make it look a bit better proportioned for his specific face. Let's make some final adjustments so his jawline doesn't look razor sharp, and that should be more or less it. Steve has great hair that works for his face shape, so we don't really need to alter his hairstyle much. He now starts to sort of resemble somebody like Christian Bale, but mostly around the eyes. If we really want to change his eye color, you can decide which one he looks better with. And it doesn't really look like Steve Carell anymore. Instead of playing comedic roles like Michael in The Office, he'd probably be taking Tom Cruise's leading man roles. This isn't to say that this is the most attractive face possible. In theory, the most attractive face would actually be toning down these changes a little and just doing a bit more from Steve's original face, but not too much like we've done here. But it is an improvement that demonstrates the extremes of Western modeling bone structure. Even the vast majority of models don't have a jawline this large and angular. Since these kind of videos take a lot of time and planning, especially if we want to show you the process and not just FaceApp it and show you the result, we could only fit 3 faces in this video. And so if you want to see more, suggest any others you'd like to see in the future, and perhaps we can turn this into a series. As always, if you want your face analyzed, much like we did it here, but with a lot more detail and rigorous scientific methods by a team of doctors and dentists, head over to the QOVES website and you can have your own analysis. If you want to change the way you look or change aesthetics or perhaps improve, head over to the QOVES website. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one.